Earlier in the year I did a 1 hour of disturbing facts that you guys all seem to really enjoy, so doing something similar this evening, but we're limiting ourselves to historical facts, so we have 1 hour of disturbing history facts for you. Apologies if you can hear maybe a slight humming in the background. I'm filming this video, it's literally like -2. It's been freezing this week, and I've bit the bullet and turned my heating on to film this video, so but I'll probably turn it off at some point during the video, but hopefully it's not too distracting. I've also brought back the ear, just because it's definitely been a long time since we've done one of these, so hopefully you enjoyed that. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and without further ado, let's get into fact number 1. I say disturbing historical facts. Some of these truly are disturbing, so this is your warning if you are a little bit squeamish or whatever. Some of these might not be for the faint heart. And the first one isn't really a nice one. So, the Nazi atrocities during World War II are well documented, but few seem to know about Joseph Mengelé's experiments on twins. That's definitely not how you say his surname, but I'm gonna rock with it. Reports suggest he performed tests on 732 pairs of twins at Auschwitz, mainly on the topic of inherited genes and attempting to prove that Jewish and Roma people were genetically weak. Survivors remember children having organs and limbs removed without anesthesia, other children getting murdered and then dissected, and still others getting infected with diseases. That's Joseph Mengele or Mengele. Evil man. We cannot speak about World War II war crimes without mentioning Japan's Unit 731. They conducted atrocious experiments on mostly Chinese prisoners of war, many on the topic of how much the human body could withstand before death. Many of the leaders were granted immunity from the US in exchange for the results of their experiments. Among other things, we know how to treat frostbite due to Unit 731. And then there's the horrors that occurred at Pitești prison in Romania after the war. Between 1949 and 1951, the Communist Party tortured, humiliated and killed political prisoners. Many of them young anti-communist students captured by the Soviets in a re-education experiment where victims had to unmask themselves and become supporters of the Communist Party. The victims were forced to renounce all religious beliefs, eat feces and torture each other, among other horrific tortures. The experiment was led and carried out by guards and other prisoners. Before you think testing on prisoners only happened abroad, you should read up on Holmesburg Prison in Pennsylvania. Dr. Albert M. Kligman performed dermatological experiments on prisoners for over 2 decades, exposing them to carcinogenic compounds, radioactive elements, diseases and infections such as herpes and more. The prisoners were paid a small amount, but many did not understand what they were consenting to, and these lasted until the mid-1970s. We now have the Tuskegee study, where scientists studied syphilis in 600 black males. None of them were told they had syphilis or understood what they were being treated for. And none of them were given penicillin, which was a readily available and effective treatment for their disease post-1943. Researchers even convinced local physicians not to treat the men. They studied them at the Tuskegee Institute instead. The experiment lasted 40 years and continued into the 1970s. It only ended because the Associated Press broke a story on it. Its last member died in 2004. Overall, 128 people had died, either from syphilis or related complications, and the disease had been passed on to 40 spouses and 19 children. The government did not apologise until 1997. The US once conducted STI experiments in Guatemala in the 1940s. The study was done on over 5,500 prisoners, sex workers, soldiers, children, and psychiatric patients. Over 1,300 of them were purposefully infected with syphilis, gonorrhea, and cancroid, and only some received treatment. During the Cold War, the CIA tested out if mind control was possible using drugs like LSD and methods like electroshock and sleep deprivation in a project called MK Ultra. The tests were done on American prisoners, prisoners in foreign detention centers, those in psychiatric hospitals and schools, and unwitting CIA agents themselves. Some of the victims were pregnant mothers and children. Now, you've probably heard of the musical Evita, and you may even know that it tells the story of Eva Peron, who was the second wife of the President of Argentina, Juan Peron. But I doubt you know the journey her body went through after she died of cancer. First, Juan tried to build a giant monument to display her body. When he was forced into exile as a result of a coup, the new regime ordered Eva's body to be buried, though they didn't want anyone to know where, lest she become a revolutionary symbol. They stored her corpse in trucks, military locations, behind a cinema, etc., before it came into the possession of Major Arangibia, who reportedly engaged in necrophilia with the corpse and then shot his wife in the throat when he was discovered. Oh, we're not done. This poor corpse. The corpse then went to Colonel Carlos Eugenio de Mori Guaynic, who allegedly also had feelings for her and had his officers pee on her when the corpse did not return his affections. What is wrong with these people? Her body was finally returned to her husband Juan, who was now remarried, though a freak accident killed the transporters. The couple kept Eva's body on their dining room table. His wife Isabel would comb Eva's hair and sometimes lie beside her. Juan eventually became president again, with Isabel succeeding him after his death, and she had the corpse displayed. She was eventually buried in her family's mausoleum, though another freak accident during transport again killed all three men accompanying her body. She currently resides in her fortified tomb, which has a trapdoor and fake coffins. disturbing. Oh gosh, well this fact starts off with in a somewhat similar story. Yes please, because the first time was so nice we have to do it twice. A man named Carl Tanzer, who worked at a Florida hospital, became infatuated with a young tuberculosis patient named Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos in the 1930s. He believed Maria to be the dark-haired woman he dreamt about for years. After she died, he bought her a mausoleum and visited her constantly for 2 years before deciding to take her body home with him. He used wax, plaster, silk and piano wire to refurbish her decaying body and lived with her for 7 years. He allegedly also placed a tube in her... I wish I didn't start reading this line, but I've started, so I'll finish. He also allegedly placed a tube in her private area for intercourse. He was finally found out after he was seen dancing with the corpse through his window. Okay, this next fact is more sad than creepy, but there's evidence that all of the crew members aboard the Challenger space shuttle survived the initial explosion and may even have been conscious until the passenger cabin hit the ocean. Robert Overmeyer, NASA's lead investigator, stated, "I not only flew with Commander Dick Scobie, we owned a plane together, and I know Scope did everything he could to save his crew. Scope fought for any and every edge to survive. He flew that ship without wings all the way down." That is sad. The next fact is the people of Bombay were not killed instantly. Most of them died in the 15 minutes following the explosion, suffocating from burning ash and gas. Some Bombay victims died not from suffocation, but from the temperature of this gas, which boiled their blood until their skulls exploded. I'm worried I've got a little bit too disturbing with this one, but hopefully you're enjoying this wholesome content. Women used to give birth upright. We give birth lying down now, not because of any medical advantage, but because in the 1600s, France's King Louis the... oh gosh, I don't know what number that is, 14th maybe, popularised the practice. He preferred this position so he could see his children being born better. It's possible this was also a fetish, or that there was a perverted reason. We didn't need to add that. We could have just left it wholesome and just left it. The father of modern gynecology, J. Marion Sims, is best known for inventing many techniques used in modern gynecology. How did he develop these techniques? Testing them without anesthesia on enslaved black women. One woman, Anacha, had 30 surgeries performed on her. The speculum and rectal examination positions used today are both named after him, and a statue of him in Central Park was only taken down in 2018. In the early 1900s, many women were employed painting watches because of their smaller hands. The paint contained radium, which the women were assured was not dangerous. They were even instructed to lick the brushes, like you might do now with thread, to get them to a fine point. But soon the women became ill and died horrifically, with their bones literally being eaten away from the inside out. Speaking Speaking of radium, it used to be used quite commonly. It was used in makeup, toothpaste, hair creams, and food. Valery Godemchuk's remains are still inside the Reactor 4 building at Chernobyl. He was working in one of the engine rooms when the reactor exploded. His body was never found. In 1999, a smaller scale but still deadly nuclear accident occurred in Japan when 3 workers were purifying uranium oxide. They put too much uranium in the tank, causing a nuclear chain reaction that released a deadly amount of radiation. 2 of the workers, Hisashi Uchi and Masato Shinohara, died as a result. But not until later. Uchi, who received the largest blast of radiation, was kept alive for 83 days while he experienced the truly horrific effects of radiation, which included his skin literally melting from his body. He had multiple heart attacks, but his family kept resuscitating him against his own wishes. That again is just really sad. I did warn you. I think I'm going to have to title this video Really Disturbing Historical Facts rather than just disturbing. The next fact is the US has lost 6 nuclear weapons and they've had 32 official Broken Arrow nuclear weapon accidents. And we don't have good numbers on how many Soviet nuclear weapons have been lost. Former Secretary of Russian Security Council General Alexander Lebed once claimed there might be over 100, though Russian officials have of course denied this. This next one is more of a creepy coincidence than a disturbing fact. While Michael Jackson was playing for 3,000 fans at Shrine Auditorium in LA, in a filmed performance for a Pepsi ad, a pyrotechnics display was set off too early, setting Jackson's hair on fire. He was rushed to hospital, having suffered second-degree burns. The creepy part: this happened almost exactly halfway through his life. He was 25 years, 4 months and 29 days old. About 25 years, 4 months and 29 days later, he'd be dead. That's insane, actually. I've never heard that before. Speaking of Jackson, the like "Annie, are you okay?" from Smooth Criminal was said to be inspired by the CPR dummy, which actually has a name, Resusci Ann. The dummy's face is based on a 16-year-old woman's corpse that was pulled from the Seine in Paris in the 1880s. The pathologist who performed the autopsy made a plaster mask of her face, which became famous as L'Inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine. When the first CPR dummy was created, one of its inventors was inspired by a L'Inconnue de la Seine mask after seeing it in a friend's home. Oh, and ever wonder why the CPR dummy was originally a woman? Most doctors were male, and the inventors thought they'd prefer to press their lips to a fake woman's lips rather than a fake man's lips. Now, this fact: slavery is still widespread today. It is estimated that 1 in every 200 people is enslaved, over 40 million people. This is over 3 times as many people as were enslaved during the entirety of the transatlantic slave trade. Modern slavery often includes forced labor, forced marriage, and sex trafficking. The slavery industry makes around $150 billion a year. Okay, so this next fact is titled Slug Soup. facts each one goes into a little bit more detail per fact. Guido de Vigevano was a 14th century doctor during the reign of King Philip VI of France, and is credited with discovering an ingenious antidote for aconite poisoning. Commonly known as monkshood, it is still found in gardens today. However, it is extremely poisonous, so lethal in fact that the Muslims used it against the Crusaders during the Crusades. You're probably wondering how a 14th century doctor came up with an antidote for a deadly poison. Aconite roots contain a variety of chemicals, including aconitum alkaloids. The most toxic, aconitine, is what allowed the plant to be weaponized by the Muslims. It kills by affecting the heart, muscles, and central nervous system, with cardiac damage being the most lethal. One day, the doctor noticed slugs voraciously eating aconite leaves, and it dawned on him that if these creatures could tolerate the toxin, then maybe they could be used as a cure. So, he collected a bunch of slugs and boiled them. He first tested his concoction on animals, and after being satisfied with the results, he tried it on himself. Needless to say, he was a brave man, since he first had to poison himself with aconitine and then drink his seriously creepy slug soup. He reported that he threw up 3 times, but afterward he started feeling better again. The next fact is titled Bomb Shadows. In the wake of the World War II atomic attacks on 2 of Japan's largest cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in 1945, survivors were shocked to see shadows of objects like bicycles and cars on sidewalks and buildings, but the worst were shadows of people. They quickly realized they were looking at the last millisecond of a person's life, very reminiscent of the macabre remnants of the people preserved in volcanic ash at Pompeii. After getting over their shock, the obvious question was how these shadows were formed. As it turns out, they're more like photographs than shadows. According to Dr. Michael Hartshorn of the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, when an atomic bomb detonates, extremely intense light and heat fan out in all directions from the area of implosion. So any object in the direct path of this energy shields the area behind it, while the area around the object gets lambasted by it. Those areas get bleached out by this massive amount of energy, leaving the areas behind the object in its shadow dark, effectively taking a picture. In this sense, an atomic bomb is like a really sinister giant camera that kills all of its subjects while taking a terrific picture of them. Definitely a creepy way to capture an image. Here we have animal trials. Over the course of centuries in Europe, nations such as Switzerland, France, Italy and others filed lawsuits against animals such as rats, grasshoppers, pigs and even snails for crimes against God, people and property. These animal trials came in 2 flavours. Secularists would file a lawsuit against a single animal that attacked somebody, and clergymen and priests would file lawsuits against pests such as locusts or rats who were excommunicated by the church for stealing grain. Here's a good example of an animal trial from the 15th century. In the Paris suburb of Sauvigny, in December 1457, A sow with 6 piglets became so violently angry and lethally violent that she attacked and killed a 5-year-old John Martin. The 7 pigs were caught red-handed in the commission of their vicious crime, smartly captured, thrown in the stockade and scheduled for trial. In the meantime, the owner was charged only with negligence and got off scot-free when no further action was taken against him. Unfortunately for the sow, she didn't fare so well and was handed the death sentence. Although the piglets were drenched in blood, they were all exonerated since it couldn't be proved they were in on the attack. This one's not only creepy but reeks of high strangeness too. Here we have Pharaoh Pepi. Pharaoh Pepi, or Pepi II Neferkare, an Egyptian pharaoh of the 6th dynasty in the Old Kingdom, was put on the throne at the tender age of 6 in 2278 BC, with his mother as his guardian. Later in life, Pharaoh Pepi became a rather strange character. He would do things like having his slaves drench themselves in honey to ward off flies. The absurdity of this is strange enough, but as the pharaoh despised the creatures, his people regarded them with a high degree of respect and admiration for their dreadfully annoying tenacity and lightning-like speed. As a result, the insect became a living representation of perseverance. This eventually led to gold flies being awarded to soldiers who performed beyond the call of duty on the battlefield. The golden fly may be the first medal of honor in history. Again, Pharaoh Pepi was well known for his strange behavior. For example, a letter was found that he wrote to the ruler of Aswan, Harkuf, who was leading an expedition into Nubia. The letter requested that the dwarves be captured at once. On a more serious note, Pharaoh Pepi is widely considered to be the longest reigning pharaoh in history, with various sources citing that he reigned for 94 years, while others say 64. Right. Here we have syphilitic zombies. I mean, I assume this is based on syphilis, but syphilitic is a great ASMR word. Syphilitic. Syphilitic. Let's stop repeating that, shall we? There are 2 theories on the origin of syphilis. One is dubbed the Columbian theory and hypothesizes that the disease was brought back to Europe by the men of the world-famous explorer Christopher Columbus in 1493. The other is the pre-Columbian theory, based on sources that vaguely suggest that the ancient Greeks had discovered treatments for some symptoms of syphilis. However, these sources are difficult to verify, so historians are forced to resort to guessing. The first European outbreak of the disease was reported by French troops after surrounding Naples in 1806. Syphilis can eat away at your flesh so bad it can literally fall from your face. It also rots away body parts, causing grotesque disfiguration and excruciating pain. These poor people were walking serene streets with body parts trailing behind them like, well, syphilis zombies. Since they were undoubtedly in so much agony, they probably didn't look or walk much different than the zombies we see in movies today. Although this story is creepiness to the extreme, it has a somewhat brighter side. Wealthy people had the means to treat the disease much more effectively, and some even survived. Those that did developed early forms of plastic surgery and lived somewhat normal lives. Real, barely live zombies New Zealand were growing suspicious about a local baby farmer, a term used for a foster parent. They were concerned about the large number of babies one Minnie Dean had, and her notices in the newspaper advertised that she was actively seeking even more. They also uncovered information that she was trying to procure life insurance on them, which isn't unusual, but it did make the cops wary. Soon rumours were flying about how these babies were disappearing. She lived in a rundown and dirty house, and in 1889 she lost a 6-month-old child. 2 years later it was a 6-week-old. Now the police started to keep a closer eye on Minnie Dean. Then in 1895 they got a lead. On May 2nd she was spotted by a reporter getting on a train with a hat box and a baby. When she returned, she had the hat box but not the baby. And it was reported that the hat box was heavier than it should have been. Her excuse was that the baby had mysteriously died during the night, and she panicked. She then crammed the poor child into the hat box, got off the train, and calmly strolled out of the station. The reporter called the cops, and they searched the tracks, but it was all in vain, since they would eventually find the tiny girl's body buried in Minnie Dean's garden, alongside the bodies of 2 other kids. Minnie was tried, convicted and hanged on the morning of August 12, 1895. A fitting end to the creepiest foster parent ever. Our next fact is titled Cruentation. There was a very medieval way for elucidating evidence to prove the guilt of someone suspected of murder called cruentation. It was well known that when the murderer got near the victim's body, it would spontaneously start bleeding. In more complicated cases, the jurors would determine guilt or innocence with a trial by ordeal. For this, the suspect would be taken to the victim and would be forced to place their hands on the corpse. A guilty verdict would be charged to the accused if any wounds on the body began to bleed, or if anything else strange happened. However, if something did happen, it would be considered God's verdict, proclaiming guilt. Ironically, cruentation actually worked probably more than we'll ever know. This downright creepy practice had success due to the intense psychological stress placed on a murderer when forced to see into those dead eyes and physically touch the cold corpse of their victim while gaping at their gory deed. The experience broke people so bad mentally that they couldn't handle their guilt and crumbled, offering a confession. Next up we have death photography. In death photography, the images are disturbing and poignant, with entire families posing with corpses of their dead and with babies that all look asleep. In others, girls with consumption regally relax while a disease snatches their young lives away, somehow enhancing their allure. Life during Victorian times was rife with death and the dead. A wave of epidemics hit, like cholera, typhus and diphtheria, had ravaged the nation, and in 1861 the grieving queen made mourning a fashion statement. These were hard times indeed. During the Victorian era, photography was in its infancy, so it was quite an operation to take a picture. These weren't Kodaks that just spit out an image. With much slow shutter speeds and long exposure times, faces completely blurred out. But the dead person, they couldn't move, so they were always in the best focus possible. I don't know why, but for some really strange and unfathomable reason, they'd paint eyes on the dead person to make them look more alive in the photograph. Mourners would also take locks of hair from the deceased to wear on rings or in lockets. They would make death masks of wax, while artists created myriad pieces depicting symbols and scenes of death. The popularity of portraits of death continued to grow with later epidemics, since a photograph was the only link they may ever have to a loved one. As Victorian nurseries were suffering from potentially fatal diseases, such as scarlet fever, measles and rubella, death photographers had job security. Death was definitely in the air, and the Grim Reaper was there, watching, grinning, with eyes gleaming, while he took a death selfie. The next fact is titled Mummy Unwrapping Party. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Europeans became totally and utterly enchanted by ancient Egypt, the afterlife, and anything and everything that had to do with mummies. The allure was so strong it received a name, Egyptomania. How did they come up with that one? Fascination with mummies dates way back to the 15th century, when mummies started to be shipped out of Egypt by merchants into Europe, often for grotesquely morbid reasons. A good example is Mumia, a medicinal product made with ground up mummies. Another was a colour of paint that was produced called mummy brown. Demand for mummies reached an all-time high in the 19th century, partly due to the success of Napoleon's Egyptian and Syrian campaigns. This caused a huge rise in interest in all things ancient. Of course, this wasn't purely scientific interest. It was more like, let's have a mummy unwrapping party, yay. These Victorian unwrapping parties were simple. Send invitations, get together on the chosen day, cook up some food, down some drinks, and unwrap a mummy. Quite ironically, it was the highly distinguished English surgeon Thomas Pettigrew who got the Victorian ball rolling on the mummy unwrapping party thing. There are reports of mummy unwrappings dating back to earlier days, but they most assuredly were fewer and farther between. The actual unwrapping part of the party normally started with a lecture or speech concerning the history of the mummy. That's good, at least it's educational. This would be followed up with the unrolling of layer after layer of ancient cloth, and the removal of the items that were included in the burial until they got to the body. Discussions would then come next about anything from the state of preservation of the body to the colour of its hair. Now that would be one creepy but very interesting party indeed. And now we have gibbeting. Throughout history, convicted criminals have been served brutal and gory punishments that fell far short of fitting the crime. Even today, there are places where if you were caught stealing, they'd cut off a hand, waist, and... One of the worst punishments of all time, though, was the infamous gibbet, a downright evil device. Gibbeting. Is that how you're gonna say it, or is it like shibbaying? I'm just gonna say gibbeting because I'm English. Gibbeting took incarceration to an entirely different level and punished punishment beyond the realm of what it is to be a human being, especially when a criminal was gibbeted alive. Gosh, what is this going to be? Most criminals were executed, but occasionally one would be gibbeted alive, while most occurred after a criminal's death. When you are gibbeted alive, you're locked into a wooden cage shaped like a human and hung up on the main track for everyone to gawk at. You can't move, you just hang there and die of thirst if you're lucky, since it's a lot quicker than starving to death over the course of a month. Only men were gibbeted, since the bodies of women were prized by surgeons and would always be dissected instead of gibbeted. Bizarrely, the practice of gibbeting was hugely popular, drawing crowds into the tens of thousands to watch a good gibbeting. Watching a gibbeting may have been fun for some, but not when one was hanging in front of your house. This would have been especially bad for you on a 90-degree humid day in mid-August. The stench would be so putrid you'd have to close your windows and cook inside your home. They could also be terrifying to people. The way they clinked and clanked, creaked and groaned, all the while swaying and twisting in the wind with maggots and rotting pieces and parts falling to the street below. Living near one, you'd constantly catch glances at bugs and birds hungrily going at the corpse as it swayed back and forth in a stiff wind, its occupant seemingly trying to escape the grisly onslaught. Gibbets wouldn't be taken down until there was nothing left but bones, so they could be there for years. The authorities, who didn't want them to be tampered with or taken down, would hang them on 30-foot poles, and sometimes even taller ones. Once, a pole was studded with over 12,000 nails to protect it from being taken down. They seriously didn't want people messing with that gibbet. It doesn't get much creepier than that. Moving on now to our next source. King Tut's parents were most likely siblings. Once you finish shuddering with disgust, here's what researchers know about the boy king and his family. His father was almost definitely Akhenaten, who preceded Tut as pharaoh in the 14th century BC. The identity of his mother is pretty much unknown, but recent DNA samples from his and other mummies have revealed that she was probably one of Akhenaten's sisters. King Tut was rather frail and suffered from a bone disorder, perhaps due to his parentage. Incestuous relationships, though, weren't out of the ordinary in ancient Egypt, a fact which is not exactly reassuring. Despite Tut's health issues, and his short life even by the standards back then, he died at 19, he's gone down in history as one of Egypt's most famous and wealthiest pharaohs. Next up, somebody tried and failed to save Abraham Lincoln, and his life just got darker from there. You're probably familiar with the 1860s illustration, The Assassination of President Lincoln, but who's that pair sharing the private box with the ill-fated president and his wife? The man on the far left rushing into action is Major Henry Rathbone. President and Mrs. Lincoln specifically asked him and his fiancée, Clara Harris, to accompany them to the theatre. After Booth fired the shot, Rathbone tried to tackle him to the ground, but Booth was able to get free by slicing Rathbone in the arm with a dagger. Rathbone was never free of the memory and guilt of that night, and he reportedly felt responsible for letting Booth get away. In the years to come, he experienced a myriad of health issues, from stomach ailments to heart palpitations hallucinations, and his mental state deteriorated as well. On December 23rd, 1883, he attacked and killed Clara, now his wife, and attempted to kill himself. He would spend the rest of his life in a mental institution. Next up, 19th century New Englanders dug up a young woman's body because they thought she was a vampire. You've undoubtedly heard of the Salem witch trials, but what about the Rhode Island accused vampire? In the late 1800s, a bout of tuberculosis struck Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont, and the residents didn't know what to make of it. Since its victims tended to look sunken, pallid, and drained, people assumed that they'd fallen prey to vampires. So naturally a vampire hunt soon commenced. When members of an Exeter, Rhode Island family began dying of consumption, that's the word, for tuberculosis back then, one after the other townspeople decided that someone in the family must be feeding on the others. Even after the mother, Mary Brown, and her 2 daughters had died, the townspeople decided to exhume the dead bodies, suspecting that one might, in fact, be undead. Brown's 19-year-old daughter Mercy had died much more recently than her family members, so her body was in much better condition. Her heart even still contained some decayed blood, a sure sign of vampirism in those days. So, to prevent her from striking again, they burned her heart and liver and mixed the ashes with water. They then gave the concoction to another affected townsperson as a cure. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work. Next up, Thomas Edison created a seriously creepy baby doll. For all his successful inventions, Thomas Edison did experience a pretty major failure when he tried to create the first ever talking dolls. His 1877 development of the tinfoil phonograph was a major breakthrough in terms of sound recording, and the endless possibilities for this technology were not lost on Edison. In 1890, thanks to the development of the wax cylinder, he was able to produce a line of baby dolls, with wooden bodies, porcelain heads, and miniature phonographs in their chests. The dolls were unlike anything the world of toys had ever seen or heard before. The phonographs played back recordings of young women reciting nursery rhymes like Hickory Dickory Dock and Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. And if ever there were dolls that deserved their own horror flick, it was these. The old, garbled technology, the shrill voices, and the dolls' eerie faces combined to make them into nightmare fuel for us today. But that's not actually the reason the dolls were unsuccessful. Their failure was due more to several different things. The pieces were easy to lose, the sound didn't last long, and was hard to understand, and the mini phonographs were highly breakable. And finally, the dolls were simply expensive. Researchers once turned a cat into a telephone. A live cat. We know what you're thinking. You've got to be kidding me. Well, unfortunately not. In 1929, a pair of scientists at Princeton University wanted to test how the auditory nerve perceives sound. Their test subject was a heavily sedated but alive cat. The scientists Ernest Weaver and Charles Bray cut out part of its brain and attached one end of a telephone wire to its auditory nerve and the other end to a receiver. When Bray said something into the cat's ears, Weaver could hear him through the receiver in a soundproof room. Though it might just seem like a sick experiment, it actually did have some beneficial effects. Many researchers believe it helped lead to the development of cochlear implants. As for the feline-turned phone, it incredibly survived the experiment, but Weaver and Bray didn't release it back into the world. Instead, they killed it to see if the experiment would work on a dead cat. It didn't. That's really sad. Right, next up. A king made his subjects worship the corpse of his beloved. This case of star-crossed lovers got weird fast. In 14th century Portugal, the king's son Don Pedro fell in love with Inés de Castro. There were only a couple of problems with this. For one, his father, King Afonso, did not approve because Inés was illegitimate. For another, Don Pedro was married. His father had arranged for him to marry a noble woman named Constanza, and Inés was Constanza's lady-in-waiting. When Don Pedro refused to stop seeing her, the king had her killed. When Don Pedro acceded to the throne 2 years later, he exhumed her body, had it clothed in royal dress and crowned a queen. According to historical legend, he made the other nobles all kiss her hand as a sign of their devotion. These people, man, just need to move on. Just move on. Plenty more fish in the sea. Some slightly more quick-fire facts to finish off this video. Stained glass windows in old churches are awe-inspiring with their intricate depictions of biblical scenes. However, the creation of these beautiful artworks had a dark secret. The process involved adding a unique ingredient to the mix: urine. Metallic oxides were combined with urine, enhancing the fusion with glass during the firing process. So the next time you admire stained glass, remember the unsavory element used in its creation. Leather-bound books are considered prestigious and often hold an air of sophistication. But in the past, the term original leather took on a much darker meaning. Some books were bound in human skin, a practice known as anthropodermic bibliography. Allegedly, the skin used was often that of executed convicts and criminals, giving a spine-chilling twist to the world of literature. The American flag with its stars and stripes is a symbol of the nation's pride and unity. However, the flag we know today wasn't always so. It was designed by Robert G. Heft, who included 50 stars, anticipating Alaska and Hawaii's future statehood. Despite receiving an initial B- grade for his effort, Heft's design eventually became the official flag of the US. That's not really a disturbing fact, is it? Genghis Khan, the infamous Mughal leader, waged brutal campaigns and created one of the largest empires in history. However, his actions inadvertently influenced climate change. The Mongol rapid expansion led to the extermination of so many people that it allowed forests to reclaim vast areas of land. These forests absorbed carbon dioxide, effectively making Genghis Khan a contributor to global cooling. I'm sure that's, what his main aim was, I'm sure. We now have Martin Cooney's incubators. Incubators play a crucial role in neonatal medicine today, saving the lives of premature babies. However, their introduction was not without controversy. Martin Cooney's approach was as unorthodox as it was unsettling. He funded his work by exhibiting premature children in incubators at Coney Island, drawing in curious crowds. Cooney's unconventional method might have saved lives, but it was certainly eerie. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory believed that cats were carriers of Satan's spirit. I agree. Consequently, he ordered their extermination, believing it was a righteous crusade. What resulted was a massive increase in the rat population, which in turn facilitated the spread of the bubonic plague. This is a stark example of how the consequences of human actions can be far from what was intended. Adolf Hitler, infamous for his crimes during World War II, had a surprising interest in Disney movies. He was particularly taken with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When Roy Disney visited Germany in 1938, he sold the rights of the movie to the Nazi propaganda ministry, leading to a private screening for Hitler himself. Even history's darkest figures found moments of enjoyment in the world of Disney. Is that really true? I mean, I know there are links, aren't there, between Disney and Nazism, allegedly. I wonder what Disney movie Hitler would like nowadays. I wonder if he'd be excited for the live action Moana. I've been recording for too long. Now we have the Leningrad famine. During World War II, the city of Leningrad was besieged by Nazi forces for 872 days. The blockade resulted in a devastating famine, and the city's population dwindled from 2.5 million to under 800,000. The desperate citizens resorted to cannibalism to survive, enduring the horrors of hunger, death, and unimaginable suffering. I'm going to stick with the cannibalism theme for our final fact of tonight's video. James S. Jameson, a member of the Jameson Irish whiskey family, took part in an expedition to Africa in 1888. During this journey, he descended to a shocking low by acquiring a 10-year-old girl and offering her to local cannibals in exchange for his own fascination with witnessing cannibalism. He even went so far as to create watercolour paintings of the disturbing event. This scandalous incident casts a dark shadow on the legacy of a prominent whiskey family. Well, that is a lovely, cheery one to end with. My only real hope is that you're either drifting off to sleep or you're already asleep. So you've missed that one. If not, I apologise, and I haven't done my job properly of making you sleepy. Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna need to title this one In insanely disturbing or extra disturbing or maybe just very disturbing, because yeah, these were disturbing. Some weird, but some just downright awful. But you were warned at the beginning, and hopefully I'll warn you in the title, so if you're still at this point and you enjoyed, a like would be